And I want to say good evening to everyone. My name is John Blasco. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to Congressmember Dan Goldman, and I will be moderating our discussion tonight. Thank you for logging on. This turnout shows how concerned all of you are about the current state of our government. Just want to give some housekeeping and format guidelines for tonight. Congressman Goldman is going to give some opening remarks, and then we will move on to questions and answers. Given the large audience tonight, I do apologize in advance. I will need to cut people off as we go on for questions and answers. I will be sharing some pre-submitted questions by constituents, as well as calling on constituents live during this Zoom meeting using the raise your hand feature to come off mute and on video to ask the congressman a question. When I call your name, I will ask you to unmute. You will see a prompt on your screen. We will only have time for one question per constituent. So when you ask your question, I will have to mute you again to allow room for additional constituents to speak. We unfortunately cannot take any follow-up questions at this time or have a back and forth conversation. I want to thank you in advance, and I apologize that we won't be able to get through every single constituent to ask a question. But with that, let's save time. Let's begin. And Congressman Goldman, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, everybody, for joining. It has been a very difficult 3 weeks, to say the least. We're down in D.C. Again this week, but there's not much going on in Congress because everything is going on in terms of Senate confirmations over on the Senate side and executive orders and Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire, taking over the federal government. I know that there's been so much activity, so much stop and starts, so many very concerning and dangerous actions from the president over the last 3 weeks. And we've been working in many different ways down here in DC and around the clock, really. There are numerous lawsuits right now. Many both nonprofit groups as well as state attorneys general have been preparing for this. And part of the reason that you see lawsuits being filed so quickly is because they were well prepared. And we had met several times with this group of state attorneys general to prepare for Project 2025. And what we are seeing is the true and swift execution of Project 2025, an effort by Donald Trump to essentially remove all forms of accountability in the federal government, take over control of the federal government by installing his own loyalists in critical positions. What I don't think we fully understood was the degree to which Donald Trump was going to hand the reins of our entire executive branch to Elon Musk, who has a host of problems, including his own significant conflicts of interest in that he receives billions of dollars in government contracts and is now being charged with going through government contracts to make the decision about which ones to keep and which ones not to keep. And we have been introducing some legislation trying to put pressure on the Republicans to act, the Republicans in Congress, that is. They are in the majority, both in the Senate and the House, which limits what we can do. We don't get to decide what legislation comes on the floor. We don't have subpoena power. We can't initiate an oversight investigation. But there are many things that we can do to try to put pressure. And a lot of that has to do a lot of that is done in coordination with all of you, because at this point, our voice really, really matters. And for Republican colleagues, especially in New York, to hear from New Yorkers about your understandable concerns, whether they be about SNAP benefits, whether Medicaid payments, whether it's Social Security checks, whether it's VA checks, whether it's, that you run a nonprofit and you rely on federal funding to meet your weekly expenses. All of this is up in the air, and I think there was an uproar when Donald Trump tried to freeze all federal funding, and ultimately he rescinded that order within a day. And the judges also have stopped a lot of their efforts, and we will see what comes from the courts. And so that's kind of a brief summary. I imagine a lot of you know about that. We're continuing to be very active in the district. A lot going on, but since this is a town hall more than anything, I would love to get to your questions as soon as possible.
Thank you, Congressmember. I want to ask Samantha Coco to unmute, and I apologize in advance if I pronounce anyone's name wrong. Please correct me.
Okay, I've unmuted. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Goldman. I'd like to know what you are doing to protect U.S. aid and unfreeze foreign assistance, which remains frozen, unlike the domestic spending.
Yeah.
There are Americans around the world serving in some of the most dangerous places. We don't get thank you for your service messages. We don't get special days to honor what we do. It was always done that the work would be the reward itself, and we have always had bipartisan support for the work we have done.
Thank you.
Currently, I have seen no communication from your office to the extent that anything is being done to represent the Americans who work for USAID, who work for American NGOs, and who work for the United Nations agencies who have been hit by this freeze. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, and it is it's beyond imagination, this notion that we're just going to freeze all foreign aid. There has been a pretty significant outcry from members of Congress and others against this decision, and especially putting pressure on Secretary Rubio. I have signed on to letters because he has the authority to essentially waive the freeze. Actually, it was like the first day after the federal freeze. I got a text from a seaman on a USAID ship in West Africa waiting to deliver humanitarian aid to Sudan. And the ship had basically been told to just stay still, remain out in the sea, which is pirate territory anyway. And there were perishable goods. I immediately took that information, spoke with Ranking Member Greg Meeks from Queens of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he worked to compile a list of similar complaints that ultimately went straight to the Secretary of State. A day or two later, that ship was allowed to port and to distribute the humanitarian aid. We have letters, we have legislation. There is litigation to address this and all of these. Really, what's just indiscriminate freezing of funding without any real idea as to what they're doing. It's beyond comprehension, and it is incredibly damaging, as you point out. And so there are a number of different groups here in Congress and outside who are bringing attention to this issue. PEPFAR is another really, really concerning issue that, as you point out, has bipartisan support. And so I would add one thing, which will be a common refrain here. Donald Trump does not care what Democrats think. I can scream and yell at him all I want, and he, will not do anything because I ask him to. But he will respond to two things. One is polling, and the other is Republican senators and members of Congress who go to him, usually privately, and ask him to change direction, change course, stop whatever he's doing. And so a lot of what we are doing is amplifying the dangerous consequences of his actions. similar to that boat, that ship off the shore of Sudan, and many, many other examples, whether it be the aid to control the ISIS prison in Syria that did get a waiver. We're trying to amplify the most dangerous and serious consequences to put pressure on the administration. And that, in some cases, has worked. We admittedly are drinking from the fire hose, and so a lot of times we are unable to amplify every specific thing, but we are doing our very best, and certainly assistance from all of you to provide us with those on the ground anecdotes is very, very helpful.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is a pre-submitted question. The question is, what safety nets are Democrats providing for Medicare and Social Security in light of our Social Security bank accounts data being stolen?
Well, on that one, there's some good news. As many of you may have read, New York's Attorney General Letitia James has led a coalition of states filing a lawsuit that ultimately received a temporary restraining order that prevented any Elon Musk or other teenagers from accessing sensitive personal information. The judge actually also ordered that they destroy any personal identification information that they had already received or already obtained. Elon Musk and I had a little Twitter battle over the weekend, but where he said that they have not accessed any personal identification information. And I suggested that he tell the judge that under oath, because one of the real issues that we are having with whatever Elon Musk is doing is we don't know what he's doing. We know he's in there. We know whatever he chooses to tell us, but there's no oversight. There's no accountability. And one way of getting accountability is to require him to put a certification under oath into a judge. He can say whatever he wants on Twitter and is not under the penalty of perjury. I'm a co-sponsor of the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, which we introduced last week, that would prevent any unvetted individuals from accessing personal information. But we're very concerned not only of the access to personal information, but also the national security and cyber risks that come with unvetted individuals accessing government databases with private servers. And we have no idea what they're doing with that information. We know they're using AI, but we don't know where that AI is coming from. We don't know what breaches there are. We don't know what holes they're providing that will allow for our adversaries to hack into this information. It's shockingly brazen and unfettered is the other way I put it. Just there's no accountability.
Thank you, Congressmember. Just a housekeeping really quickly. There is a hand raise feature, and I know some folks were messaging about audio issues. Please, if you need to log out and log back in, please do so. I will let you in from the waiting room. The next question is Jason Miller. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, Josh, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jason. Go ahead, ask your question.
Wonderful. Congressman, thank you so much for doing this. I work in the federal office building on Varick Street. I'm a federal employee. That building is in your district. Mr. Musk accused my agency of tremendous fraud this morning on Twitter. And Mr. Trump wants to, I know, have GSA sell about half of federal office buildings. The building on Varick Street is enormous. It's a major pillar of commerce in that particular part of Manhattan. It's the Hudson Square West Village border. Federal jobs are a huge gateway to the middle class, and they seem to be under the threat of extinction right now. What can you do to preserve the federal office space in your district and look out for us federal employees? Thank you again so much for doing this.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm sorry that you are dealing with this. I was a federal employee for 10 years as well, and it's almost unconscionable and certainly unfathomable what's going on. I can say a couple of things on the federal workforce. First of all, there are 50,000 federal workers in New York City. Obviously, there are a lot in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, but plenty are in New York City. And the notion of cutting that workforce in half is going to leave a number of people who are dedicated public servants, many of whom have been working for decades for the public good, as a gateway, as you point out, to the middle class without jobs. And that will hurt the entire economy of New York City in so many different ways. The one thing that is somewhat helpful in that regard is that I believe that a judge has put a freeze on at least the fork in the road email, or the idea of forcing people to choose between retiring early or getting fired. It's a preliminary step, but it's a good sign that the judge is taking it very seriously, because this is an effort that is designed to just slash and burn our federal government, and really without regard to whatever may be waste, fraud, and abuse. It's all a myth. Every time they say waste, fraud, and abuse, they're lying, because they have no idea what is waste, fraud, and abuse. They can't yet, until they were to do an actual investigation. Certainly, we are going to push back against this idea of selling half of GSA's real estate holdings. And, this is all part of the process where we're going to have litigation. We are going to have messaging and a lot of protesting and press amplification to lift up this issue, so that the American people understand the real world consequences of these actions, that they don't just get Elon Musk's very slanted view on Twitter. And we're going to put pressure on the Republicans, because really at the end of the day, the Republicans have been silent, as you all probably know, in the Senate and the House. They have just let Donald Trump for 3 weeks do whatever he wants. They're not putting up really much of a fight at all about anything. But it is also their constituents who are going to be burned and hurt by whatever Elon Musk is doing here. I do think that was a part of the reason why the total freeze on domestic funding was rescinded, was because Republicans were hearing from their constituents as well. And that's something that we're going to continue to put pressure on them to bear the burden and the responsibility for what Trump is doing, and to put the checks and balances that our Constitution requires Congress to use against the executive branch. And certainly we're going to keep especially pressuring some of the New York Republicans who are in tough districts, a few of them at least, and certainly who will understand from their constituents that their support for these lawless actions by Donald Trump will be met with a lot of opposition at the ballot box.
Thank you, Congress member. The next question is a pre-registered question. It says, is Congress contemplating litigation in response to the president blatantly breaking the law and violating the Constitution?
Yes. And as I mentioned, I think there are about 40 lawsuits that have been filed already. Maybe about 10 have reached, a temporary restraining order, a very preliminary step to kind of keep the status quo, freeze everything, so that the judge can evaluate the claims in more detail. One of the things that is frustrating is individual members of Congress do not have standing to file lawsuits against the executive branch, meaning that there's no direct harm to us that a court requires in order for a court to rule on something. Congress as a whole can file a lawsuit, but that is controlled by the majority. So the majority here in the House is Republican, and they are not filing lawsuits. So we have been trying to coordinate as much as we can. And in fact, I've spoken to a number of federal employees who've been wrongly terminated or reassigned and help direct some of them to lawyers. And if there are any out here that would like to consult with a lawyer, please let us know. We can help direct you in the right direction. And so the Congress itself can't file litigation, but we are working hand in glove with a lot of the groups and the state attorneys general to push forward on litigation and to use our platform here to amplify in the press and the media, because public opinion really does matter. And I can't emphasize that enough. If Republicans start seeing, as we already have, Elon Musk's favorability rating go down, their own favorability rating go down, Donald Trump's favorability rating go down, this notion that Donald Trump ran on a platform of taking over the federal government is total bogus, but that's what they are saying right now. And so we all need to make it very clear that regardless of whatever, the outcome was at least undesirable to me, but the reason he won had to do with his promises to address the cost of eggs, lower the cost of living, to some extent to secure the border. He hasn't done a single thing to lower prices. In fact, the only things he's done that have affected prices have raised them. Prescription drug prices, he undid what the Democrats had done in reducing prescription drug prices. And the tariffs are going to get passed through and are going to increase prices. So that's really what he ran on, and he hasn't done anything like that. And we have to make our voices heard that's not acceptable.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I'm going to ask Patrick Shaw Kitch to unmute. Patrick, are you there? We'll try one more time. You'll see a prompt on your screen.
I am here, sorry.
There you go.
Hi. Yeah, I want to also echo everybody else's statement. Thank you for doing this town hall, and I really hope that our two senators will also do the same thing. My question is, you talked about Republicans being the problem in terms of getting things done. And so I want to talk about more locally here. We have a Democratic mayor who is working with Donald Trump, working with ICE. And I want to know what the Democratic Party is doing to help with Eric Adams and making sure that he isn't just becoming a kind of like a puppet of Donald Trump to help push forth his agenda in New York City. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for the question. I think the fear and intimidation that our communities are feeling from this lawlessness by ICE and immigration detention, and this view of the Trump administration that immigrants have no rights and we're just going to round everybody up and figure out who's here legally and who's here not legally, goes against all the basic values that we have, all due process rights. And I've been hearing a lot of people, I've been hearing a lot of reports of American citizens being detained. It is brutal. I mean, it's horrific racial profiling that's going on. It's just totally, totally unacceptable. I have, just in terms of what we've done, we held a Know Your Rights town hall a week or two ago with the New York Immigration Coalition, making sure that everybody understands what is what immigration authorities are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. If they have an arrest warrant, they are allowed to go into a home and arrest somebody. They're allowed to pick somebody up. But if they don't have an arrest warrant or a search warrant, they don't have a right to go into a home or a building or what have you. And you don't have to speak to them if they ask you questions. That's a right that everyone has in this country, regardless of whether you're a citizen or not. I'm very concerned about the mayor, and I think yesterday was a pretty seminal day. First, you had the mayor in the morning instructing his administration not to speak out in opposition to Donald Trump's immigration policies. Donald Trump's immigration policies include the elimination of sanctuary cities. New York is a sanctuary city. So the two of those policies are in direct conflict. And if the mayor is not going to defend our laws, our city laws, and make sure that they are executed properly, then he's not executing his job as mayor of New York City, and he is not representing the people of New York City as he is required to do. And this plea in this memo from the Department of Justice that directs the dismissal of his case under very unusual terms and circumstances is even more troubling because it effectively makes Eric Adams a hostage to Donald Trump until November of 2025, when the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York is supposed to re-examine the case according to a number of factors. None of those factors have to do with the evidence or the law, which are the only factors that the Department of Justice should be considering. And so I think there are a lot of open questions right now as to how can he continue as mayor if the judge does accept the dismissal of his case under these particular terms.
Thank you, Congressman. You spoke a little bit about protecting undocumented people, so I am going to skip that pre-registered question. I'm going to go to the next one, which is why are organizations across the country still unable to access funding if a judge halted Trump's freeze on these funds?
I think this is the domestic federal funding, because the first question Samantha asked was about international funding, which still has a significant amount that is frozen. There should be no freeze on any domestic federal funds right now. And if there is, we need to know about it. A judge in Rhode Island has stopped the freeze from happening. And yesterday, that judge held another hearing and actually determined that the Trump administration was not in compliance with his order, which is the first step of several before you end up getting into a situation where the judge has to decide how and whether and how to punish the administration. And ultimately, what I'm very concerned about is that Donald Trump just says, I'm not following what the court says. And just to be clear, this is a scary time. There are a tremendous number of what are clearly lawless actions and dangerous actions. But we do have a system of government that is set up for this, which is the judiciary branch. I'll put aside the Supreme Court for a second, but in theory, the judiciary branch is responsible for making sure that laws are properly executed and used. If the executive branch decides that those court orders are not likable and therefore they're not going to follow them, we will hit a constitutional crisis that we've never encountered before since 1803, Marbury versus Madison. when the separation of powers was really established. And I was at least somewhat encouraged that the president said today that he would follow court orders. He would appeal them, but he would follow them. And I certainly hope that he does, because as bad as things are, as much as this unelected billionaire is seemingly taking over our government, we still do have a process in place to provide some accountability, and that's the judiciary. It should be Congress, but given the Republicans are not interested in that, let's put that aside for now. But ultimately, if Trump just says, I'm going to defy court orders, then we no longer have a country based on the rule of law, which is the very foundation of democracy.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I am going to call on Marvin Ellen Sibarin. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Marvin.
Thank you, Representative Goldman, for all you've been doing and for having to work with those monsters in the Capitol. Clearly, the elected Republicans have no morality and no spines. Are there any efforts being made, and this is a three-part question, are there any efforts being made to get Republicans who are not in elected positions but who might still have standing to come out publicly to refute what Trump and Musk are doing? Relatedly, in that worst case scenario that you raised, if Trump does provoke a constitutional crisis, have there at least been discussions of what can be done to try to counter that? And the third, which is somewhat—
Marvin, I'm sorry. We can only have room for your first question. I'm so sorry. We have to make room for other speakers.
Okay, use this as a teaching moment for all the people who didn't understand what's terrible about electing Trump.
Thank you, Marvin.
There are Republicans, traditional Republicans, who have been speaking out a little bit. You may have seen there are 5 former Treasury secretaries from both parties wrote a joint op-ed in the New York Times expressing their serious concern about the federal payment system and giving someone like Elon Musk and his teenage computer tech folks access to it. And I think, we've been starting to see a little bit more and more of that. There is definitely an effort to have more Republicans speak up. The problem, which I think many understand right now, is that the traditional Republican from the George Bush era is scoffed at by these MAGA Republicans, Trump and J.D. Vance and this sort of Marjorie Taylor Greene, this new wave of isolationist sort of renegades who seem to literally have just no morality, but no empathy either. I mean, the idea that you would just cut off all foreign aid because you don't think it helps yourself because you're here in America is incredibly short-sighted from a foreign policy perspective, but is also just incredibly cruel. And so they don't care that much what, the John Boltons say or other very conservative, Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney. They don't care. They think that's a old school Republican who is from yesteryear. But I do think there are still some Republican elected officials in the House and Senate who, as you point out, do not have spines yet, but who are, I know they're concerned. Some have said they're concerned about where this is all going. And there are a lot of people who think that Trump is just a lot of bluster and He puts out a crazy opinion or a crazy idea that's really a negotiating position. That's what you hear a lot from the Republicans. I'm not so sure about that, but I think at some point, if we actually get to the point where we reach such a constitutional crisis, or we are getting close to it, or more facts come out about the fact that Elon Musk actually has access personal identification information or something like that, I am, well, I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I am hopeful that some Republicans will stand up, because um, it's pretty baffling the degree to which they are happy to allow Donald Trump to undermine and take away their own power and authority, because that's what he's doing. He's taking away power and authority from Congress in doing everything that he's doing. And there are these Republicans who are just happy for him to do that.
Thank you, Congress member. The next question is a pre-registered question. The question is, how will you use your legal experience in the first impeachment trial to push back against what Trump is trying to do?
Well, for better or worse, I know Donald Trump very well. You don't want to be in my head. Let's just put it that way. But I think there are a couple of different ways that I am already relying on that experience. The first was in the fall, I guess, where in November, he came to the Capitol and met with some of the House Republicans and referenced the idea of staying on for a third term. And all the Republicans came out and they said, oh, he's just joking. He's just joking. Well, I've seen this play before, where he will throw out a cockamamie idea, claim that he's joking, keep bringing it up as a joke, normalize it, and then you get all these Republicans to start pushing it. I think back to the first time that he said that he could pardon himself. And there was an outrage, uproar. Everyone was, are you crazy? You cannot possibly pardon himself. As we went into the November election, I think most Americans just assumed he would pardon himself. He had normalized it to such a degree. He has threatened and done so many worse things that too many accepted it. So I knew this is sort of his MO, and this was the first step. So I actually introduced an amendment to reaffirm that a resolution that reaffirmed that the 22nd Amendment says that no president can serve more than 2 terms, and that means Donald Trump as well. More recently, a Republican member of Congress introduced a constitutional amendment to allow Trump and anyone else to serve more than 2 terms. I actually view that as a victory for us, because they conceded that we need a constitutional amendment, which means that they agree that the 22nd Amendment, as it stands right now, does not permit him to have a 3rd term. In order to pass a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, as well as 3/4 of the states. So that's not happening anytime soon. So as long as that's the path they want to go, that's fine. The other lesson that I learned was related to the whistleblower complaint. When, I don't know how many are familiar with it, but in September of 2019, we were informed by the Inspector General of the intelligence community that there was a whistleblower complaint that was being improperly withheld from Congress by the White House, by Donald Trump. For the previous few months, Donald Trump had said he's going to defy all subpoenas from Congress. He had not been cooperative at all. And so we knew that, similar to what I said earlier, we could go directly to the White House and scream and yell and say, you have to turn this over. You have to turn this over. The law requires it. But we weren't going to get very far. So we took another tack, which is to put pressure on those around him. So we went and called for a public hearing the Director of National Intelligence, who was responsible for overseeing the entire intelligence community, including this whistleblower complaint. And he was going to have to come testify and explain or justify or support in some way why the administration was withholding this complaint that very clearly under the law should have been turned over. And my understanding is, after a number of conversations with the White House, including threats of resignation, ultimately he convinced the White House to release the whistleblower complaint because he didn't want to, he was unwilling to go and testify in a public hearing to justify the lawless actions. And I use that as an example of how we're going to have to put pressure on Trump, which is that we're going to have to do everything we can to go at people around him, to the sides of him. That includes the Republican senators and the Republican members of the House, especially, you know, the vulnerable ones in New York and elsewhere around the country who are going to at some point have to face the reality that they either support Donald Trump or they win their reelection, and that they can't do both. And the Republicans have such a slim majority that this week it will probably go down to a 1-vote majority. That is nothing. That is absolutely nothing. Last term, they were unable to do anything, and they had a bigger majority. So there will be an opportunity for us where they will need us to either raise the debt ceiling or to continue to fund the government. And we are really gearing up to use, to use our position to say, hey, you want our help, you're in the majority, you can do it yourself. If you want our help, then you're going to have to agree to this long list of things that we want. And so we're getting ready for that as well.
Thank you, Congressmember. The next question is coming from Wes Ryson. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Wes.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi. Do I just ask the question? Yes, right? Sorry. What are your thoughts on, namely, what things could you tell me about things that I couldn't find elsewhere on whether it would be a good idea for AFL-CIO to do a national strike or something like that until Trump resigns to have J.D. Vance instead? And also, I should quickly note, on convincing Trump and people around Trump, there's this really good book called How Minds Change. If you don't have time to read the whole thing, chapter 8 is really good. And if you have extra time, chapters 9 and 10. Again, that's How Minds Change.
Thanks, Wes.
I like the out-of-the-box thinking, and I can assure you that we are doing a lot of that as well. The Senate, especially with all these cabinet nominations, has a little bit more better opportunity to gum up the works in some of those ways. But I do think that we are in close communication with all of the unions. A number of the unions have filed lawsuits against these executive orders. And I think it's really important to be thinking outside the box. I mean, one of the things that we've done just to continue to put pressure on Trump and on the Republicans is a number of us on the Democratic side have gone to the specific executive branch agencies where they are trying to shut them down. And we've tried to get in. We've had press conferences. We've gotten a lot of media attention. And so I think that's important to do. But what you're talking about, I think, is even more aggressive action. I think that, I think we have to consider all the variables, right? You go on strike, you don't get paid. There's a lot of considerations before doing something that drastic. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to resign under any circumstance, so I'm not sure that should be our goal, but we can still use the same tactic to undo some of his unlawful and unconstitutional actions.
Thank you, Congressmember. The next question is a pre-registered question. It's clear that Project 2025 and the ideologies of Curtis Yerban are in play. How do we ensure our democracy survives?
Well, it's a good question. I say with some sadness, this was something that I personally focused on a lot during the campaign. And I think one of the lessons that I learned from the campaign is that as much as we warned people about Project 2025 and that this was and is what Donald Trump is going to do, even though he claimed he didn't know anything about it, it didn't resonate with people because it was still too general. It was still too much in the future. And I think what we need to do a better job of, and that we are focusing on, and where all of you can be very helpful, is connecting Project 2025 and these efforts to dismantle our democracy, to take over the federal government, but to relate it to how it impacts every American. And I think that's something that we are really trying to focus on. And to that end, getting anecdotes from constituents, whether there are stops in some of the federal funding that people receive, whether you're not getting passports or you're not getting tax refund checks, or your organization doesn't have access to the federal funding that the budget relies on and that you are already granted. These stories are really important because we need to connect Project 2025 to everyday Americans who are struggling to make ends meet and to pay bills, to pay rent. And so that's where a real group effort from everyone on here and beyond can really make a big difference.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question, I'm going to ask Lisa Raymond Tolan to unmute.
Hey, thank you. Hi, Congressman. I am a constituent. I'm also with Indivisible Brooklyn. My question is, I know you talked about the Senate having some ways that they could oppose, particularly because they're in the thick of Senate, the nomination process, but there are ways the House can also oppose. I was really alarmed and shocked by Leader Jeffries basically throwing his hands up and saying, "What can I do? I have no leverage," when in fact the House does have leverage. So what are you going to do to push the leader and the rest of your caucus to use the leverage that you have in the House in regards to the budget that's coming up, to halt the House, and to not go by business as usual? We're in a crisis, and we need our Democratic members of Congress to fight in new and novel ways, in ways that may not be comfortable, to shut things down until we stop the coup and get the Republicans who need you for the budget negotiations to stop this lawless insanity that they're committing against the American public.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what you're referring to about Leader Jeffries. I can tell you that we are very focused on the March 14th budget deadline for the reasons you just said, which is that we will have leverage, and we had a list in December of things that we wanted, that were our priorities. That has changed now, obviously, given what is going on. And so we're very focused and we're very determined to make sure that that if we're going to be involved, that we get our priorities in there. That's that's still a ways away, right? That's 5 weeks away. And what we're seeing is a very rapid deterioration of our democracy. So, we are trying to think outside the box. I do think that, none of the dangerous stuff that's going on right now is coming through Congress. It's all executive orders. It's all executive actions. And so, we are trying, to be out there fighting, speaking up, speaking against it, putting pressure on the administration, on everyone, and making just sure Americans understand what's going on, because it's so fast moving. And wherever possible, we're not voting with the Republicans right now. We're not, I think what you will start to see as you see these hearings unfold is we're not really interested in the topics of their hearings. We're going to take our 5 minutes and focus on the things that really matter, which is not these, hearings on. I had one on the workforce development in cybersecurity, which literally happened the day after Elon Musk got access to the government payment system, which is a tremendous breach of cybersecurity. It was kind of through the looking glass. But I can assure you that we're not throwing our hands up, and that we are talking constantly. We are working together constantly. And we will, I assure you that we will continue to fight. And we now have a new task force on litigation and rapid response that I'm hopeful of joining, that will help support litigation, help with rapid response, help coordinate with outside groups, with governors, with mayors, with attorneys general. We're going to have a broad coalition that's going to coordinate through that task force.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is a pre-registered question. How will the Trump administration impact the funding for the New York City Public Housing Authority programs and NYCHA across the board?
Well, another thing I'm very, very concerned about. We've obviously had a lot of difficulty getting federal funding for capital improvements of NYCHA. It's a bill that I'm co-leading with Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez that is obviously essential to start to repair the deteriorating NYCHA buildings. The things that the federal government can do that would cause significant problems is if they were to slash funding for Section 8, which obviously hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers rely on, and if they were to reduce the low-income housing tax credit, which is the federal government's way of incentivizing affordable housing to be built. And obviously in New York, where we are in such a housing crisis and we so desperately need housing, we should be plussing up the low-income housing tax credit. We should be adding additional tax credits to incentivize building housing, and especially affordable housing. And so we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that does not happen. And again, part of it is just connecting it to all those people in Republican districts and Republican states who rely on Section 8 or other critical federal services.
Thank you, Congressman. We have time for one more question. I'm going to ask Holly Atkinson to unmute.
Thank you so much, Representative Goldman. I've called your office several times in the last week or two, as you might imagine. I just want to follow up on what Lisa said. The point I've made when I've called your office is that as the stuff that's going down in the Senate is so dire, with nominees getting voted in by all the Democrats, et cetera, and then we see that, folks like Rubio are absolutely, going after USAID. I'd love to ask you, as a constituent of Senator Schumer's, with a high visibility platform as a freshman, we're lucky to have you. If you, as a constituent of Senator Schumer, could lean on him to deny unanimous consent and vote no on all the remaining nominees. I mean, it's just appalling. They're all bad. If they're seconds, they're going to be bad. But we've got to just do all we can to deny unanimous consent in the Senate. And then, Leader Jeffries said, what leverage do I have? A friend of mine in Washington who works on the Hill sent me a list. It's all arcane. Sequester parliamentary inquiries, unfunded mandate, point of order, question of personal privilege, filibuster. I won't go on. I'm sure you know what these are. We'd love to share this with your office. But there's a lot you can do, even with the lack of leverage that seems to be inherent.
Thank you.
But yes, if there's anything you can do
Yeah.
with Chuck,
Well, I think the Senate has caught on. Let's put it this way. And I remember talking to some colleagues. I think it was the day after Kristi Noem got confirmed for Homeland Secretary, and she appeared in New York, at 5 a.m. with her big vest on and her hair perfectly done to go and on a raid of someone that they claimed had all sorts of a criminal background, just to make a big sort of spectacle of it all. Meanwhile, they were then picking up all sorts of people who had no criminal history, no criminal connection, some of whom I think were American citizens. And there were 7 Democrats in the Senate who voted for her. And I remember thinking, man, I would not like to be one of those Democrats who now has to have some degree of ownership over everything that she does. I think we're past that point now. They're not only not doing unanimous consent, they're using their full 30 hours for every vote. They're extending the committee nomination process by as much as they can. There are some of those parliamentary tactics you mentioned are feasible, but not as much as they used to be. There's just very little opportunity on the floor where anything like that would be called in order. And there's really no legislation that is driving this takeover of the federal government. It's really just the executive branch trying to exert excessive power that Congress needs to respond to. So we are introducing legislation. We will try to use discharge petitions, which is a way of getting a bill to the floor. If 218 members sign on to that discharge petition, then it goes automatically to a vote. But we still need Republicans to join us for that. So that's difficult. But we're certainly aware of a lot of these different options. And I think, one of the things that we're also very cognizant of is really being strategic about this and focusing on the things that Trump is doing that are a danger to Americans. So I, for one, have not been talking about Greenland or Panama or, some of the other crazy stuff that he says, because he says that just to distract from the dangerous stuff that he is really doing. And so I do think that there is more coordination and a targeted effort to push back on the dangerous things he's doing, which he doesn't talk about as much. He's not talking about the tax cuts that they're trying to push through, which is going to be potentially $5 trillion to go way disproportionately to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and other billionaires. He doesn't talk about that because he knows that's unpopular, but he wants to talk about all this other stuff. And so I do think that we are focused on being a little more strategic and targeted about what we amplify and focusing on actions rather than some of his outrageous statements.
Thank you, Congressman. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us tonight for this New York 10 town hall. All of you have put forth so many great questions. There's a lot of more questions we could get through. For those of you who came in late, I want to remind you that we will be posting this town hall recording on the Congressman's YouTube page. I want you all to know that our team here, the Congressman team here, we read your emails, we hear your calls, and we will continue to fight for every single New York 10 constituent. We've also heard the question of how can you get involved? I want to encourage all constituents, if you have not already, Contact your local community boards. Sign up to be a public member. Attend your local meetings. Contact your school districts. Participate in community education council. If you visit goldman.house.gov, you will also see a page for Immigration Know Your Rights. It connects you and your neighbors, our neighbors, to their rights and to nonprofit organizations, just like the work that the New York Immigration Coalition is doing. And if you need assistance with a federal issue, please call one of our offices, whether you are a Brooklyn resident or whether you are a Manhattan resident. And for now, I just want to say, everyone be well, take care of yourself and each other. And Congressman, final thoughts.
I do want to say that I'm grateful for everybody joining, and we are going to do these a lot more frequently. There's so much going on, and we want to be accessible to you. I want to make sure everyone can hear from me directly about what's going on in DC, what we are doing, what issues are coming up, what areas we're focusing on. And then I would just urge everybody to lean in a little bit more. If you can get involved in some of the litigation, please do so. If you can bring anecdotes and stories about how this what's going on is affecting you, I mean it when I say that it's really helpful. And then we've got a lot of Republicans in New York who should be reminded of where New Yorkers are on all of these things. So thanks again, everybody, for joining, and look forward to seeing you all soon.